It is tempting to dismiss the global refugee crisis as some kind of unsolvable problem after all. This poisonous eternal crisis will continue to froth and bubble for an infinite number of political cycles, but will paradoxically remain in dynamic equilibrium. And for Western liberal democracy, it threatens to become a super-catastrophic risk, along with Putin's Russia, the rise of China, and global epidemics. For if there is one truly volcanic problem that threatens to erupt into a populist revolt and turn the entire European liberal tradition to ashes, it is intractable illegal immigration. It is very strange that neither the political left nor the political right has come up with anything even remotely resembling a serious solution. On the one hand, liberals continue to plug their ears with pompous talk about the Refugee Convention of the early 50s and lectures about compassion in a global world. More worryingly, the elites have yet to realize how liberal democracies are threatened by the rise of deceptively simple problems, and they are so explosive precisely because their solutions seem outrageously simple. Stop the boatloads of illegals, turn them back to France, crush the smugglers, get out of the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights, and take back control. On the other hand, solving these deceptively simple problems is frustratingly difficult. Instead of taking up the challenge, however, elites have for years put the problems in a long box labeled unsolvable. Up until the recent economic downturn, they expected to mitigate the full brunt of anti-immigrant populism if they distracted the people with redistributive policies instead of coming up with a real plan to stop the boatloads of illegals. This, in turn, has only added to suspicions that some sort of conspiracy against democracy is brewing, whereby elites somehow refuse to implement popular and seemingly self-seeking policies, just on the grounds that they offend someone's cosmopolitan sensibilities. And so some conservatives have finally woken up and realized that the situation is politically unsustainable, but they have compounded a deceptively simple problem by switching from lazy pessimism to newfound utopianism and preaching to anyone desperate enough to believe them that the situation will be magically fixed by exiling immigrants to Rwanda. But even if the UK withdraws from the ECHR and implements its plan for Rwanda, the risk of sending everyone who crosses the channel to Africa is so small that it will hardly stop anyone. In the meantime, the refugee crisis is approaching a tipping point, and the fact that no one still has a sane plan in place makes it all the more alarming. Today, the West is already facing an unprecedented influx of migrants. In popular memory, the pandemic will be remembered as a decade lost to international development, when tens of millions of people were plunged into abject poverty. Meanwhile, the surge of violence in Africa and the Middle East is worsening, a trend that has been going on since the Cold War military funding dried up. The emergence of new regional hegemons could keep the situation under control. It was expected that such a stabilizing power would be Nigeria, for example, and that its involvement would make military coups and civil wars in Africa a thing of the past. But instead, Abuja's impoverished armed forces are putting out endless fires in the backwaters of the country, which spill over into neighboring states. There was still hope that with America's withdrawal from the Middle East, the Gulf states would step up, but they continue to shirk their responsibilities to fellow refugees in the most outrageous manner. Not only that, they have already proven their helplessness. Anti-hegemonic forces, like Iran, unleash proxy conflicts with impunity, and they are powerless to stop them. Needless to say, with the growing instability in the developing world, the West seems more and more attractive. Thanks to the internet, it has become easier not only to see how people live in richer countries, but also to contact smugglers who obsessively advertise their services on social networks. Then, having reached their destination in Berlin or London, the migrants will start transferring money home and so feed the whole village. Fixing this mess will not be easy. The entire migration legal industrial complex will have to be gutted. Yes, the ECHR is an arrogant judicial leviathan that decides every case in isolation and pushes through an overly free interpretation of human rights. But unlike the EU, which is subject to natural laws of harmonization and cannot be reformed a priori. The ECTH can and should be curbed, with the UK leading the way. Moreover, the time has come to breathe some sense into the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, that useless relic of the Cold War. It is long overdue to be called to account for the fact that the Refugee Convention continues to mindlessly promote the principle of non-refoulement. It might have made some sense when the West feared for the fate of people in communist-controlled territory, but in today's world, when educated and talent-rich developing countries have to get smart and clean up their own mess, it is highly bizarre. It is time to recognize the unpleasant fact that the entire international refugee system has become profoundly immoral. The West is wasting resources on highly mobile and relatively well-educated men who can afford thousands of pounds in smugglers' fees, but not on the less fortunate who are languishing in refugee camps. Activists pretend that the right to citizenship is a holy cause, overlooking that the brain drain has already blown the chances of rebuilding a whole range of countries from Syria to Albania. So we will have to change international law so that educated migrants will have to return home when the conflict subsides. All this is just the beginning. Western powers must also work out a reasonably fair international quota system and adhere to it carefully. Asylum claims should be processed in a safe territory as close as possible to the country from which the person came. International law needs to be changed so that those who come to Europe and try to get through without queuing are automatically sent back. We need a global campaign for zero poverty, similar to the environmental campaign that is trying to stop climate change, and we need to move from the humanism of white saviors to austerity out of charity and accelerated development. Above all, however, elites must convey to voters that illegal immigration is an insidious problem that will be solved, no matter what.